9 men with rifles. A black Dodge Roadster, hit so many times some counts put it past 150 rounds. And in under 5 seconds, the most dangerous man in Mexico for the better part of a decade is dead in the street.
Here's what should stop you, though. Not the ambush. The funeral. The next day. Nobody comes.
This is a man who once had 50 armed dorados riding at his back. 20,000 men under his command at the height of it.
And the day they bury him, the room is empty. None of his old loyalists. None of the men who loved him.
So, Parral, Mexico, July 20th, 1923. Let's back up and figure out how you get from an army to an empty room.
¡Chamarras! ¡Chamarras de piel!
There's a guy selling pumpkin seeds on the corner that morning. Nothing special about him. Until he isn't selling pumpkin seeds anymore.
He's the signal.
He's the signal. He shouts,
¡Viva Villa!
And the roadster comes around the corner.
Villa in the passenger seat. 53. Retired. Farming. For about 4 more seconds.
Villa's hit at least 9 times. Dead before the car stops rolling.
4 of the 5 men riding with him. Dead in the street. 1 survives. Loses a finger. Plays dead in the dirt until it's over.
So how does a man go from 50 guards to 4 in 3 years?
Let's rewind further than that, actually. Because the most dangerous man in Mexico isn't something we're saying for effect.
No. March 1916, Villa crosses the U.S. border and raids Columbus, New Mexico. 17 Americans killed. It's the only armed foreign attack on the continental United States between the War of 1812 and Pearl Harbor. Which gets him General John J. Pershing and 10,000 U.S. troops sent across the border specifically to capture him. The Punitive Expedition. 11 months deep into Mexican territory. They never find him. Why cross the border and pick that fight at all, though? The U.S. had just recognized Carranza's government as legitimate, cutting Villa off from the arms and support he'd been counting on. Depending who you ask, Columbus was retaliation. So even the raid that made him a legend was personal. Maybe everything about this man was. The entire U.S. Army, on his home ground for the better part of a year. And Villa just isn't there when they arrive. And before any of that, 1914, at the height of it, an American film company pays him for exclusive rights to film his battles. The Mutual Film Company. Action! There are accounts of Villa restaging skirmishes for the cameras when the real fighting doesn't cooperate with the shooting schedule. Which is either the most cynical thing on this whole timeline, or exactly what a man does when he already knows he's going to become a legend, and wants to control the story while he's still alive to tell it. Maybe both. 1920, Villa's fighting a losing war against the Carranza government when the whole thing turns violent from an unexpected direction. Carranza's own general, Álvaro Obregón, the man who'd actually beaten Villa on the battlefield 5 years earlier at Celaya, turns on him. Obregón and his allies revolt. Carranza runs for his life, flees Mexico City by train, then on horseback into the mountains of Puebla, and he's killed in May 1920, trying to escape. Obregón takes power, but here's a detail worth getting exactly right, because it matters for what comes later. Obregón isn't the one who makes peace with Villa. That's Adolfo de la Huerta, Obregón's ally, serving as interim president in the gap before Obregón's own term officially begins. De la Huerta's the one who offers the deal. 25,000 acres at a hacienda called Canutillo in Durango, a pension. And Villa gets to keep 50 of his own dorados as a personal guard, written into the agreement, government-sanctioned. And Villa, the most dangerous man in Mexico for a decade, takes it. For 3 years, that's exactly what happens. He farms. He builds a school for the local kids. He runs cattle. By every account, he's out of the game. And then, sometime before July 1923, that number quietly drops. 50 guards becomes 4. Nobody signs an order cutting it. There's no single document that says, reduce Pancho Villa's security detail. It just happens. Attrition, reassignment, whatever the official language would have been if there'd been official language. Which is the whole question of this episode in one sentence, Eli. Does nobody signed the order mean nobody's responsible? Or does it mean somebody made very sure there'd be nothing to sign? That's a fair question. I don't think it has one answer. I don't either.
But I want to say something before we get further into the paper trail, because it matters for how I'm going to argue this. Villa isn't a name I met in a research packet. He's a name I've heard my whole life, at family tables, from my grandfather. The same story told 4 different ways depending on who's telling it that year. Bandit, revolutionary, Robin Hood, warlord, sometimes all 4 in the same sentence.
That's not nothing.
It's not evidence either, and I'm not going to pretend it is. But it's a different way of knowing a story than reading 800 pages of primary source history. And I think both are legitimate ways into this case.
Agreed. So let's build the 2 cases. Mine starts with the confession, because unusually for this kind of assassination, somebody actually stands up and takes credit. Jesus Salas Barraza, a local politician, minor figure, publicly announces he planned the whole thing, confesses openly, no trial theatrics, no denial.
Which already should feel strange to you. Men who plan political assassinations do not usually hold press conferences about it.
It gets stranger. He's convicted, 20-year sentence.
And released after 7 months.
Reportedly by order of the state governor, who, by the way, owes his position to Obregon's political network.
There it is. That's your whole case, isn't it?
That's the fulcrum of my whole case, yeah. Because think about what that pattern actually is. Public punishment, private mercy. That's not what happens to a man who acted alone out of personal grudge. That's what happens to a man who did a job somebody wanted done and then got paid for it in leniency instead of cash.
You're reading a gap as a signature.
I'm reading a pattern as a signature. There's a difference, and there's more sitting right next to it. Obregon, Calles, and De la Huerta rose together in that 1920 revolt against Carranza. But by 1923, Obregon's backing Calles to succeed him, not De la Huerta, even though De la Huerta was right there at the start, expecting his own shot. That's the friction. And De la Huerta's the same man who gave Villa his amnesty.
Wait, Villa's own amnesty giver becomes a problem for Calles' circle?
By 1923, yes, Villa's making noises, publicly, about backing De la Huerta for president over Calles. That's not abstract. That's the man who armed Villa's guard, being openly favored by Villa, right as De la Huerta and Calles are heading toward an actual split. 5 months after Villa's death, De la Huerta rebels outright.
So Villa's not just a wild card. He's a wild card leaning toward exactly the man Calles' people don't want in power.
Exactly. Whoever's protecting Salas Barraza doesn't need Villa to actually rearm. They need him gone before his support for De la Huerta becomes real weight behind a real rebellion.
Okay, let me take that apart, because I don't think the 7-month release does the work you're asking it to do.
Go ahead.
A quiet release after a public confession is exactly what happens when the state wants to protect a symbol. Justice was served, a man confessed, a man was punished, without actually costing anyone their real life over a killing plenty of Mexico privately celebrated. That's not necessarily, we ordered this. That can just as easily be, we're relieved this happened and we're not going to be the ones to punish the man who did it properly.
That's a meaningful distinction you're drawing.
It is, and here's where I'd rather put the weight. On Salas Barraza himself, and on a general named Joaquin Amaro.
Who'd go on to become Secretary of War a couple years later, under Calles.
Right, not yet in 1923, but already rising, and already someone who'd spent 1916 to 1920 personally hunting Villa as a guerrilla fighter in Chihuahua. He never accepted the amnesty as legitimate, and Salas Barraza's own grudge isn't vague. By most accounts, Villa had once whipped him during a dispute over a woman. You put a general who never forgave the amnesty next to a man carrying an actual personal humiliation, and you don't need a presidential order. You need a grudge with money and motive behind it, and cover from above that only shows up after the fact.
You're describing the same outcome with a smaller cast.
I'm describing it with a truer-to-people cast. Look at how this killing actually happened, Eli. Not the sentence, the ambush itself. Whoever planned this knew exactly which road Villa would take home from town, knew his exact schedule down to the day. That's not a distant institutional decision working through channels. That's somebody who studied this man up close. That's intimate. That's personal.
Or it's what professional surveillance looks like when it's done well.
Sure. Or it's what a specific, remembered humiliation looks like when it finally gets its moment. Stripping a man from 50 guards to 4 before killing him isn't just tactically convenient. It's cruel in a specific way. That's not logistics. That's someone making a point. And it's not just Salas Barraza and Amaro either. There's a third name attached to this, Meliton Lozoya, local landowner. His family had a piece of their hacienda handed over to Villa's veterans years earlier, under the land reforms Villa pushed through once he settled at Canutillo. The house the ambush was staged from was Lozoya's.
So now you've got 3 men with 3 separate grudges, Salas Barraza and the woman, Amaro and the years spent hunting him, Lozoya and the land.
3 men, 1 house, 1 morning. That's not a government operation dressed up to look personal. That's a debt finally getting collected by everyone who was still owed something.
Or it's a government smart enough to recruit people who already wanted him dead for free. I'll grant you the ambush details read personal. I don't think that rules out institutional cover existing above it.
I don't think it rules it in either. That's really my whole argument. I'm not saying Obregón and Calles are innocent. I'm saying they let it happen and made sure nobody paid a real price for it is a different sentence than they ordered it. And your 7-month release doesn't tell us which one we're in.
It's the strongest single piece of evidence either of us has.
It's the strongest single piece of evidence you have, because it's the one thing that's actually documented on paper. Mine doesn't live on paper. Mine lives in what kind of ambush this was, and who had a documented reason to want him dead badly enough to plan it personally.
For what it's worth, I think that's a real gap in what I've got. I can build you an institutional chain that ends in, they benefited and they covered. I can't hand you a signed order. Nobody can. That document doesn't exist, and by every account, it never did.
And I can't hand you Salas Barraza's private motive on a silver platter either. He never explained himself past the confession. We're both working right up to the edge of what the record actually gives us.
Which might be the honest answer here. Multiple plausible sponsors. No closed verdict. A fall guy who was very clearly protected by somebody. We just don't agree on who or how far up. So here's mine, plainly. This was cover from above, dressed up as a personal killing so nobody has to answer for it. The 7 months tells you everything the institutions never will.
And mine is that institutions don't need to order what 3 people already wanted badly enough to plan themselves. The cover came after because it was convenient, not before because it was ordered.
We've basically been saying that in different words for 20 minutes.
Some arguments are like that. 100 years later, and Mexico still hasn't settled on who Pancho Villa even was, let alone who killed him. Bandit or revolutionary? Warlord or hero of the poor?
The historical record doesn't resolve that. It just keeps handing you more evidence for whichever side you already believed.
Maybe that's fitting, because the version I grew up with was never trying to resolve it either. My grandfather would tell it one way when he wanted Villa to be the hero, and a different way when he wanted to make a point about violent men and the myths we build around them. Sometimes in the same telling, 10 minutes apart. That contradiction isn't a flaw in the story. For a lot of people, it is the story.
We're not going to solve that tonight.
No, but I don't think we're supposed to.
One last strange thing before we go. 3 years after the ambush, 1926, someone breaks into Villa's grave and steals his skull.
Never recovered. An American named Emil Holmdahl was implicated at the time.
And for 100 years since, there's been a rumor, never proven, always denied, that it ended up in the hands of a Yale secret society. Skull and Bones.
No documentation, no confirmation. Just a story that's outlived every attempt to close it.
Fitting, honestly.
Fitting.